A courthouse clerk refused to stamp one eviction. Then the billionaire saw the name he'd forgotten. The billionaire developer walked into the civil courthouse with a smile already prepared for the cameras, a brass plaque already screwed into the lobby wall, and a stack of eviction judgments waiting for one final stamp. He thought it was paperwork. One quiet records clerk, sitting behind scratched glass in worn black flats, looked down at the first file, saw a returned envelope taped to the back, and slid the whole stack away from her stamp. "I can't enter this," she said. Grant Halden stared at her like she had reached across the counter and slapped him. Behind him, his attorneys shifted. His assistant whispered about deadlines. A local reporter waited outside for a quote about the new affordable housing project that was supposed to rise where the old apartments stood. All Alma Reyes had to do was press a stamp onto paper. One motion, one sound, one default judgment that would make a woman lose her home before dinner. But Alma had been taught something by a janitor who read court notices at the kitchen table after midnight. Read the paper before you move the stamp. So she read. She read the address. She read the apartment number that was missing. She read the proof of mailing that had come back undeliverable. Then she read the tenant's name, Elena Brooks. Grant Halden did not react at first. Why would he? To him, Elena Brooks was a name in a case file, a delay in a redevelopment calendar, a person who had failed to respond. But Alma knew something he did not. Elena Brooks was sitting on the hallway bench outside records, wearing a brown coat with one button missing, holding an oxygen tank between her shoes, waiting for a hearing that the court system said she had already missed. And Grant was about to discover that the woman his company was removing from her home was the same woman who had fed him dinner when his own mother was dying. The stamp sat between them on the counter, heavy, silent, ready. And the question was simple. Would Alma protect the speed of the system, or would she protect the person the system had stopped seeing? Alma Reyes worked counter 4 at the Monroe County Civil Courthouse, the counter closest to the public computers and farthest from the judge's elevators. Her official title was Records Technician 2. Nobody called her that. To lawyers, she was Mom when they wanted something, and the clerk when they were annoyed. To landlords, she was the woman behind the glass. To tenants, she was often the first human being in the building who slowed down long enough to explain which window they were supposed to stand in, which form they were missing, and why the word default could empty an apartment faster than a moving truck. She was 42 years old, with dark hair she pinned back every morning with a plastic clip that had lost one tooth. Her black cardigan had shiny elbows. Her shoes had been resoled twice. On the lanyard beside her ID badge hung a small brass key, old and useless now, from the first apartment her parents ever rented after coming to America. Her father, Rafael Reyes, had kept that key long after the lock was changed. "Never throw away the first door that opened for you," he used to say. Rafael had cleaned offices for 31 years. At night, he emptied trash cans under framed degrees and polished conference tables where men made decisions about buildings they had never swept. During the day, he read every envelope that came into the house, every receipt, every notice, every bill. Not because he trusted paper, because he knew paper could hurt you if you ignored it. When Alma was young, she hated how carefully he read everything. He would sit at the kitchen table in his undershirt, glasses low on his nose, one finger moving across each line while the rest of the family waited for dinner. Rent receipt, utility bill, school permission slip, bus schedule, tax notice. "Papi, it's just paper," Alma would say. And every time, Rafael would tap the page and answer, "No, paper is where power hides when it doesn't want to look you in the face." Then he would hand her the envelope and say the line that followed her into adulthood. "Read the paper before you move the stamp." Back then, it sounded like one of his tired old sayings. Now it was how Alma survived her job. Every morning she arrived before 8. She unlocked the records office, turned on the computer terminals, checked the printer trays, and pulled the red metal stamp pad from the bottom drawer. The stamp itself was ugly and important. Black handle, rubber date, court seal. It left ink on everything, including Alma's fingers, her sleeves, and once, during a terrible Monday, the edge of her lunch bag. Filed, entered, received, certified, default. The courthouse lived by stamps. A stamp could start a lawsuit. A stamp could end one. A stamp could prove someone had answered in time. A stamp could say someone had not answered at all. Alma did not wear a robe, she did not argue cases, she did not make law. But at counter 4, she was often the last person who touched a file before the court treated silence as agreement. That was why she read. Not every word in every case. No clerk could do that and keep the line moving. But she read the parts people skipped. Names, addresses, dates, proof of service, returned mail, apartment numbers, signatures, the small places where a life could fall through. Her supervisor, Doreen Pike, hated that about her. Doreen ran records like a train station. Keep the line moving. No speeches. No legal advice. No emotional entanglement. If the system accepted the filing moved. If the box was checked, the box was checked. Alma. Doreen would say from behind her desk, "You are not a detective." And Alma would answer, "No, I'm the person with the stamp." It was not a joke. Doreen never laughed. The morning everything changed started with rain. Not a dramatic storm, just the cold, steady kind that made courthouse floors slick and turned paper soft at the corners. 9:15, the records lobby was already full. A landlord in a wool coat stood near the copier, tapping his foot. A young mother bounced a baby while trying to fill out an answer form with one hand. A man in a work uniform asked whether he could file a response during lunch and still get back before his break ended. 2 attorneys argued quietly by the elevators. A security guard told someone to take their phone call outside. Alma called the next number, Civ 116. A woman approached the counter slowly, pulling a small oxygen tank behind her in a metal cart. She was in her late 60s, maybe early 70s, with a brown coat buttoned wrong and a knit hat flattened from rain. Her hands were careful with the folder she carried, the way people hold papers when papers are the only tools they have. "Good morning," Alma said. "How can I help you?" The woman leaned close to the speaker hole in the glass. "I got this from my neighbor's mailbox yesterday. She said she found it behind the radiator in the lobby. I think I missed something." She slid a wrinkled envelope through the slot. Alma flattened it gently. The letter was a notice of eviction hearing. The hearing date was yesterday. Alma looked at the case number, then at the woman. "Your name is Elena Brooks?" "Yes, Mom. You live at Westbridge Court Apartments?" "For 34 years. Alma typed the case number into the system. The file opened. The landlord was Halden Urban Residential LLC. The complaint listed non-payment and termination after redevelopment purchase. The certificate of mailing showed the notice had been sent to 118 Westbridge Court, Building B. Alma looked back at the envelope. No apartment number. She looked at Elena. "What apartment are you in?" "B214. Alma typed. The court file did not show B214, it showed only Building B. A small cold feeling moved under Alma's ribs. "Mrs. Brooks, did anyone hand you papers in person?" "No." "Did you get anything by certified mail?" "No, just this. And it was late. My neighbor saw my name and brought it down. I came as soon as the bus came." Alma looked at the docket. The landlord's attorney had already requested default judgment that morning. Default. That word sat on the screen like a door closing. Elena's face was trying to stay calm, but fear kept moving through it in little flashes. Her eyes went to the line behind her, to the security guard, to the elevator where attorneys disappeared into places she did not know how to enter. "I paid what I could," Elena said. "I have receipts. They raised the charges after the building sold. I asked for a statement. I never got one. I don't understand the fees. I don't want trouble. I just need someone to see I came." There it was. Not a speech, not a scandal. Just one person asking the courthouse to acknowledge she existed. Alma took the folder. "I can't give legal advice," she said, "because the rules required those words." Elena's shoulders dropped. "But I can show you where to file an emergency motion to set aside a default if one is entered, and I can check whether anything has been entered yet." Elena blinked. "So I'm not too late." Alma looked at the screen. The requested judgment was pending clerk review. It had not been entered, not yet. "You are late," Alma said gently. "But late is not the same as gone." Elena's eyes filled. Alma stood and came around the side door, because some moments needed less glass between people. She walked Elena to the public computer. She helped her find the court's self-help forms. She did not tell her what to write. She could not. But she read the instructions aloud, slowly, and pointed to the box labeled, "I did not receive proper notice." Elena's hand shook as she wrote. Outside, rain kept tapping the courthouse windows. At 11:37, Alma returned to counter 4 and found 3 attorneys waiting in front of her station. The tallest one had silver hair, a navy suit, and the smooth expression of a man paid never to look surprised. Beside him stood a younger attorney with a laptop bag and a stack of files bound with blue clips. Behind them, holding an umbrella he had not bothered to fold, stood Grant Halden. Even if Alma had not seen his face on bus stop ads and business magazine covers, she would have recognized the way space changed around him. People moved differently when someone rich entered a public building. Not bowing, not exactly, but adjusting, making room, looking twice. Grant Halden was 48, clean-shaven, tall and calm in the expensive way. His gray coat probably cost more than Alma's monthly rent. He had inherited part of a real estate portfolio from his father, multiplied it, sold a logistics company, bought old buildings, turned some into luxury apartments, and some into what his website called mixed-income communities. He also funded courthouse technology. That was why his name was on the brass plaque in the lobby. The Halden Access Initiative had paid for new public terminals, a digital filing kiosk, and a scanning system that promised to speed civil cases by reducing manual review. The plaque read, "Justice moves faster when access moves first." Alma hated that sentence, not because access was bad, because faster was only a virtue when the direction was right. The silver-haired attorney slid a stack of proposed default judgments through the slot. "Good morning. We have 32 Westbridge matters for entry. All notices mailed, no answers filed. The system shows eligible for default." Alma accepted the stack. Grant checked his watch. The attorney smiled slightly. "We're on a tight schedule. The relocation office needs final possession dates before the council hearing." Alma said nothing. She opened the first file. The name was not Elena Brooks. It was Raymond Ellis, apartment B106. The certificate of mailing listed Building B, Westbridge Court, no unit number. Attached to the back was a scanned returned envelope. The postal mark said insufficient address. Alma opened the second file. Same building, no apartment number, returned. The third file, same. The fourth, no return envelope, but the notice address again lacked a unit number. Alma felt her pulse slowing, not speeding. Her body did that when something was very wrong. Panic got quiet, details got sharp. She looked up. "I can't enter these." The younger attorney frowned. "Excuse me. The proofs of mailing are defective. The unit numbers are missing on multiple files and at least some notices were returned." The silver-haired attorney's smile thinned. "The court's e-service record shows addresses imported from the tenant ledger. If there was a formatting issue, it is not material. The tenants failed to appear." Alma placed one returned envelope against the glass. People can't appear for hearings they were not properly told about. Grant spoke for the first time. "Is this a legal determination?" His voice was polite. That made it worse. Alma looked at him. "It's a records issue. The file does not support entry." The attorney leaned in. "With respect, clerk, the judge already authorized defaults on non-appearance. We are submitting the judgments for processing." "With respect," Alma said, "the judge authorized defaults based on the assumption service was proper. I am not stamping a judgment with returned mail in the file and missing apartment numbers on the notice." The lobby had gone quieter. Doreen Pike appeared behind Alma as if summoned by discomfort. "What's the problem?" The attorney turned to her with relief. "Your clerk is refusing to process eligible default judgments." Doreen looked at Alma. "Why?" Alma held up the envelope. Doreen did not take it. "Is the filing accepted by the system?" "Yes." "Is there a judge's default list?" "Yes." "Then process the judgments." Alma felt every person waiting behind her. She felt the attorneys watching. She felt Grant Halden's impatience, controlled but present. She felt Elena Brooks somewhere behind the row of chairs, still writing on a form with an oxygen tank beside her. "Read the paper before you move the stamp." Alma slid the stack to the side. "I can't." Doreen's face hardened. "Step away from the counter." Alma did. Doreen took the first judgment, checked the screen, picked up the stamp, and hesitated, because Alma had left the returned envelope on top. Doreen read it, only for a second. But she read it. Then she set the stamp down. "Counsel," Doreen said, "we'll need to review these." The attorney's face went red in a controlled, professional way. "Review them for what?" "Address sufficiency." Grant looked from Doreen to Alma. "How long?" Doreen said, "I don't know. We have a counsel hearing tomorrow." Doreen's voice flattened. Then I suggest your notices went to the right apartments. Grant stared at Alma again. This time, he did not look angry. He looked like a man who had encountered a locked door where he expected a hallway. Alma did not enjoy it. She was not winning. People think moral choices feel powerful in the moment. Sometimes they just feel like standing in a room where everybody wants you to become easier. At 1:15, Doreen called Alma into her office. The office was barely bigger than a supply closet. There was a calendar from the Court Employees Credit Union, a mug full of pens, and a framed poster that said, "Accuracy is service." Someone had taped the poster crooked years ago, and nobody had fixed it. Doreen closed the door. "You understand what you just did, yes. You embarrassed a major donor in the lobby." "I stopped a bad judgment. You are not a judge, no. I'm the clerk who saw returned mail." Doreen sat down slowly. She was 58, tired in the bones, and not unkind, but she had spent too many years being punished for problems she did not create. That kind of job teaches people to fear friction. "Alma, I know you care. I know why people ask for you. But caring does not protect this office when attorneys complain to the presiding judge. Entering defective defaults won't protect the office either." Doreen rubbed her forehead. "Do you know what they'll say? They'll say you delayed housing redevelopment. They'll say you practiced law from the counter. They'll say you targeted a filer because he's wealthy." Alma almost laughed. "Doreen, I would have stopped it if it came from a landlord with one duplex and a truck. I believe you. They won't." There was a silence. Then Doreen said softer, "You have your father's appointment today, right?" Alma looked down. 3 o'clock, neurology follow-up. Raphael had been forgetting things for a year. First names, then bills, then the way home from the corner store. The doctor had not used the word Alzheimer's yet, but the word had been sitting in the room for months, uninvited and impossible to ignore. "I can still make it," Alma said. Doreen looked at the stack of Westbridge files on her desk. "You won't if you start chasing this." Alma knew that. Her father's folder was in her bag. Insurance card, medication list, memory notes, questions for the doctor. She had written everything in careful block letters last night, while Raphael slept in the recliner with a baseball game on mute. At the top of the page she had written, "He is still himself." She had written it for the doctor. She had written it for herself. Doreen saw her face and sighed. "I'll put the Westbridge stack in pending review. But you leave at 2:30. You take your father. You let me handle the attorneys." Alma nodded. For 3 hours she tried. She processed small claims, certified copies, wage garnishment paperwork, motions, answers, continuances. She explained to a man that he needed 3 copies, not 1. She helped a woman find the fee waiver form. She told a landlord calmly that yelling would not change the filing rules. At 2:26, Elena returned to the counter with her emergency motion printed and signed. "I did it," Elena said. Her voice sounded surprised, as if completing a form in a courthouse counted as crossing a river. Alma reviewed only for completeness: signature, case number, date, copies. Then she stamped it received. The sound was small. To Elena, it sounded like being seen. "Take 1 copy to courtroom 6, Alma said. "Ask the clerk there if the judge can review it before close." Elena looked terrified. "Will they let me talk?" "They may not, but your paper will talk first." Elena touched the stamped page. "My husband used to say that. He kept receipts in coffee cans. Said paper remembered better than people." Alma smiled. "My father says something like that." Elena looked at the brass key on Alma's lanyard. "That from him? The first apartment my parents rented. That's a good thing to carry." Alma almost said, "Today it feels heavy." Instead, she said, "Good luck upstairs." At 2:38, Alma grabbed her bag and hurried toward the employee exit. Then she saw Grant Halden standing by the plaque in the lobby, talking on the phone. He was trying to keep his voice low. "No, I understand the optics. I'm telling you the delay is clerical. We'll get it resolved. The Westbridge timeline is not changing because one record's clerk wants to make a point." Alma stopped. She did not mean to. Grant turned and saw her. There are moments when 2 people become human to each other, and there are moments when they choose not to. Grant chose not to. "Mrs. Reyes," he said, reading her badge, "can I ask you a question?" Alma should have kept walking. Her father was waiting. But she turned. "You can ask. Do you understand what happens if those judgments are delayed?" "Yes." "Do you? Because Westbridge Court is not a healthy building. Half the plumbing is failing. The elevators are unreliable. The electrical system is a lawsuit waiting to happen. We are trying to clear the site so we can build safer units. By evicting people who may not have received notice. By moving a legal process forward. Alma looked at him. Legal is not the same as right when the notice never reached the person. Grant's jaw tightened. We have relocation payments available. We have staff. Did the papers say that? I assume so. Alma held his eyes. That is the problem. Not furious. Annoyed, which somehow hurt more. You don't know the whole project, and you don't know the whole file. For a second, the lobby noise receded. Then Alma's phone buzzed. Her sister, Lucia, she answered. Alma, where are you? Poppy walked out. The courthouse tilted. What? He walked out of the apartment. I was in the bathroom for 2 minutes. The neighbor saw him near Maple, but I can't find him. He doesn't have his phone. Alma's hand tightened around the strap of her bag. Grant was still standing there. The plaque was still shining behind him. The attorneys were still waiting somewhere upstairs. But the world had narrowed to one old man in a blue jacket, confused in the rain. Alma ran. She did not say goodbye to Grant Halden. She did not clock out. She did not ask permission. She ran through the employee exit, down the side steps into the wet afternoon, and called her father's name into streets that did not answer. For the next 40 minutes, Alma became every family member who has ever searched for someone they love while trying not to imagine the worst. She checked the bus stop, the corner store, the church basement where Raphael played dominoes on Fridays, the little park with the chess tables. She called Lucia, then called again. She called the clinic. She called the building manager. She called security at the grocery store and described her father's jacket. Blue windbreaker, gray cap. 74 years old. May be confused. Answers to Raphael. May say he is going to work. That was what broke her voice. Because Raphael had not worked in 6 years. But lately, when his mind slipped backward, it often went to the night shift. He would pick up his old lunchbox and say he had to catch the bus downtown. Once, Alma found him at the kitchen sink washing clean coffee mugs because he said the conference room needed setting up before the morning partners arrived. At 3:21, her phone rang. Unknown number. Is this Alma Reyes? A woman asked. Yes. I'm calling from the Monroe County Civil Courthouse security desk. We have a gentleman here who says he's your father. Alma stopped walking. He's there? Yes, a mom. He came in through the main entrance. He seems a little disoriented, but he's safe. Alma covered her mouth. I'm coming. She arrived 12 minutes later, soaked through her cardigan, breathless and shaking. Raphael sat on a bench near the metal detectors, holding his old lunchbox on his lap. He wore the blue windbreaker and gray cap. His shoes were wet. His face brightened when he saw Alma, but not in the way of a father seeing his daughter. More like a man seeing the person who could explain why the room was unfamiliar. Mija, he said. I came to bring your lunch. The lunchbox had been empty for years. Alma knelt in front of him. Poppy, you scared us. He looked ashamed immediately, and that hurt her more than the fear. I was going to the office, he said. But the bus was wrong. She took his hands. They were cold. You're safe now. He looked past her toward records. This is where you work? Yes. He smiled, proud and lost at the same time. You read the papers? Alma nodded, and tears came before she could stop them. Yes, Poppy, I read them. He tapped her lanyard weakly. The brass key swung against her badge. Good, before the stamp. She pressed her forehead to his hands. Behind her, someone cleared his throat. Grant Halden stood several feet away. He had seen enough to understand that the clerk who had blocked his judgments was not performing righteousness for an audience. She was a woman with a wet cardigan, a frightened father, and no spare room in her life for making enemies. For the first time all day, Grant looked uncertain. Miss Reyes, he said quietly, is he all right? Alma stood. He's safe. I can have my driver. No, the word came sharper than she intended. Grant stepped back. Alma softened only a little. Thank you, my sister is coming. Raphael looked at Grant. His eyes narrowed with the strange confidence of memory half lit. You from the tower company? Grant blinked. I'm sorry? Raphael pointed toward the courthouse doors, toward downtown, toward all the buildings Grant owned, or had touched, or had put his name on. You buy buildings, Grant said carefully. Some. Raphael nodded like that explained everything. Read the notices. Buildings got people inside. The sentence fell into the space between them, not poetic, not polished, just true. Grant did not answer. Because what do you say when an old janitor with a failing memory remembers the part your project forgot? Lucia arrived 10 minutes later. She was younger than Alma by 5 years, still in scrubs from her dental office job, face tight with guilt. "I'm so sorry," she kept saying. "I turned my back for 1 minute." Alma hugged her. "We found him, that's what matters." Doreen appeared near records and told Alma to go home. Not asked, told. Alma wanted to argue, because the Westbridge files were still pending, and Elena was somewhere upstairs waiting for a judge. But Raphael looked small on the bench, and her sister looked one apology away from falling apart. So Alma went home. That night she sat at the kitchen table after everyone else was asleep. Raphael was in the bedroom. Lucia had stayed on the couch. The neurology appointment had been rescheduled, but the clinic could not fit them in for 3 weeks. The rain had stopped. The apartment smelled like wet shoes and chamomile tea. Alma opened her work bag to take out her father's medical folder. Inside, tucked beside the medication list, was one of the copied Westbridge envelopes she had accidentally carried home. Elena Brooks, returned, insufficient address, no apartment number. Alma stared at it. Then she pulled out her laptop. The courthouse had remote access for docket review, not for editing. She could see public documents, scanned proofs, entries, and images. She could not change anything. That mattered. Alma did not alter records. She did not sneak into systems. She did not become the thing she was fighting. She looked. 1 file, then 5, then 12. By midnight, she had reviewed all 32 Westbridge default requests. 26 had notices mailed without apartment numbers. 19 had returned envelopes. 7 had tenants listed as no appearance, even though emergency motions or letters had been scanned into the file but not docketed correctly. 4 had tenant names spelled differently in the complaint and proof of mailing. 1 had an address that did not exist at all. And every defective address had come from the same source, an imported tenant spreadsheet attached to the landlord's batch filing. Alma did not need a law degree to see the failure. The system had accepted a batch of cases as complete because the required boxes were filled. It had not understood that a box could be filled with missing truth. That was the practical cruelty of bad paperwork. It looked finished. At 1:10 in the morning, Raphael came into the kitchen in his socks. "You working?" he asked. Alma closed the laptop halfway. "A little." He sat across from her. For a moment he seemed fully present. "Tired, but—" "You remember Mrs. Bell?" he asked. Alma smiled faintly. "From the 4th floor? She got locked out once. Manager said no rent," she cried in the hallway. He tapped the table. "I had receipt copy. Your mother made copies of everything. We showed him." He opened the door. "I remember." Raphael looked at the envelope on the table. "Someone locked out? Maybe. You have the paper?" "Yes." "Then put it where a judge can see." Alma breathed out slowly. "Read the paper before you move the stamp." The next morning, Alma arrived at the courthouse with swollen eyes, 2 coffees, and a folder labeled Westbridge Notice Review. She gave 1 coffee to Doreen. Doreen looked at the folder and said, "I am afraid to ask." "You should be." Inside were 32 case numbers, with a simple table: tenant name, address on complaint, address on notice, unit number present or missing, returned mail yes or no, tenant response scanned yes or no, recommended action for supervisor review. No legal conclusions, no speeches, just records. Doreen read the first page, then the second. Then she closed her office door. "Alma," she said very quietly, "did you do this from home?" "I reviewed public docket images. I did not change anything." Doreen sat down. "You know they can still say you overstepped." "They can." "You know Grant Halden is meeting with the presiding judge at 10. "I figured. You know I cannot protect you from everyone." "I know." Doreen looked older than she had yesterday. "Why are you doing this?" Alma thought about Elena's oxygen tank, her father's wet shoes, Grant's plaque, the missing apartment numbers, the way the stamp had felt under her hand, waiting to turn bad notice into legal truth. "Because if we enter these now, people will lose homes, because nobody wanted to slow down." Doreen looked at the folder again, then she stood. "Make 3 copies." At 10:05 Alma was called to the small conference room behind courtroom 6. She had never liked that room. It had no windows, a long table, and chairs that made everyone sit too upright. On the wall hung portraits of retired judges, all of them looking as if they had been disappointed by the living. Presiding Judge Naomi Bell sat at the head of the table, silver hair cut short, reading glasses on a chain. She was known for being calm, direct, and allergic to drama. Doreen sat to one side with the folder. Grant Halden sat across from them, with 2 attorneys and a city housing liaison. Alma took the empty chair near the door. She felt like a child called into the principal's office, which annoyed her because she was 42 and had earned every gray hair on her head. Judge Bell looked at her. "Miss Reyes, I understand you flagged the Westbridge default judgments." "Yes, Your Honor." "On what basis?" Alma glanced at Doreen. Doreen gave the smallest nod. Alma opened the folder. "I reviewed the proofs of mailing submitted with the default packets. In most of the cases, the notices did not include apartment numbers. In more than half, returned envelopes were scanned into the file. In several, tenant responses appear in the image queue but were not docketed before the default list was generated." One attorney leaned forward. "Your Honor, with respect, this is argument." Judge Bell did not look at him. "It sounded like records information." The attorney leaned back. Grant watched Alma. Judge Bell turned a page. "Miss Reyes, are you alleging misconduct?" "No, Your Honor. I'm saying the record does not support treating these tenants as silent. The room changed, because that was the heart of it. Not fraud, not villainy. Silence. The system had mistaken bad notice for silence, and in court, silence could become judgment." The city liaison cleared her throat. "The address import came through the new filing interface. It standardizes fields from bulk submissions. There may have been a formatting issue." Judge Bell looked over her glasses. "A formatting issue that removes apartment numbers from eviction notices is not formatting. It is notice failure." Grant's attorney said, "We can reserve any file the court identifies." Alma spoke before she could talk herself out of it. "All of them should be checked." The attorney looked at her sharply. "That is not your decision." "No," Alma said, "but it is my record." Judge Bell's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. Grant finally spoke. "Your Honor, may I see the list?" Doreen slid a copy across. Grant read it. At first his face stayed neutral. Then his hand stopped. He was looking at page 2. Alma knew the line. "Elena Brooks. Apartment B214 omitted. Returned mail, emergency motion received." Grant stared at the name longer than he had stared at any of the others. The confidence drained from his posture. "Elena Brooks," he said. His attorney whispered, "Do you know her?" Grant did not answer. Judge Bell noticed. "Mr. Halden?" Grant's voice changed. It lost its meeting room polish. "When I was a child, after my mother got sick, there was a woman who worked nights in our house, cooking, cleaning, helping with my little brother. Her name was Elena." No one moved. He looked at the page again. "Elena Brooks. I haven't seen that name in years." The room was silent except for the air vent. Alma felt no satisfaction, only sadness. Because this was how invisible people returned to powerful lives. Not through memory, through a case number. Grant swallowed. "I didn't know she lived there," Alma said quietly. "That is why the paper matters." Really looked. Not at the badge. Not at the cardigan. Not at the obstacle. At the person who had stopped his company from taking a legal shortcut through a woman's life. Judge Bell closed the folder. "Here is what will happen. No Westbridge default judgments will be entered today. All pending default requests from this batch are stayed for notice review. The landlord will file corrected service documentation in each case or reserve proper notices. The clerk's office will audit any scanned tenant responses in the image queue. And I want a report from court administration on the batch filing interface by Friday." Grant's attorney opened his mouth. Judge Bell raised one hand. "I am not finished. This court will not trade due process for speed because a project calendar is inconvenient." That sentence did not save anyone by itself. Sentences rarely do. But it stopped the stamp. Sometimes stopping harm is the first door. Outside the conference room, Grant caught up with Alma near the public elevators. "Mrs. Reyes." She turned. He looked shaken and maybe a little ashamed, but shame in powerful people is not useful unless it becomes work. "I owe you an apology," he said. Alma held her folder against her chest. "Mrs. Brooks is upstairs. She could use one too." He nodded. "I'll speak with her. After her case is protected," Alma said. He blinked. "She does not need a reunion that makes you feel better while her housing is still in danger." The words landed harder than Alma expected. Grant looked down. "You're right." That surprised her. Not enough to trust him, but enough to notice. He said, "What should I do?" Alma almost laughed again, but there was no humor in it. "You have attorneys. Use them to withdraw the defective filings." Reserve properly. Make the relocation office answer the phone. Put human review on every case before your company asks a court to treat someone as absent, and stop calling notice failure a clerical delay. Grant nodded slowly. Then Alma added, and don't make Mrs. Brooks your redemption story. He looked at her. She is not a symbol, Alma said. She is a tenant. That was the line he remembered later. Not because it was poetic, because it gave him something practical to do. Grant did go upstairs, but Alma did not follow him right away. She went back to counter 4 because the line had not stopped. The courthouse did not pause because one rich man recognized one name. A woman still needed copies. Still needed to file an answer. A landlord still tried to submit an unsigned form. A teenager still asked where to pay a traffic fine for his mother. Alma kept working. At noon, Elena came down from courtroom 6. Her oxygen tank squeaked with each step. Grant walked beside her, not touching her, not guiding her, not performing care, just walking at her pace. Elena's face was pale. Alma came around the counter. What happened? Elena held up a paper. The judge had set aside the pending default request, ordered proper service, and scheduled a new hearing. It was not victory, not yet. The rent dispute remained. The redevelopment remained. The future remained uncertain. But Elena had time. And in housing court, time is not small. Time lets a person gather receipts, call legal aid, ask questions, move with dignity instead of panic. Time is sometimes the difference between sleeping in your own bed and sleeping in a car. Elena touched Alma's hand. You got my paper there. You wrote it, Alma said. You made sure it got seen. Grant stood behind her, quiet. Elena turned to him. You were little, she said. Grant's face changed again. I was. You wouldn't eat peas unless I hid them in rice. A broken laugh came out of him. I remember that. You had nightmares when your mother was in the hospital. You used to sleep on the kitchen floor because you said the stove light looked like a moon. Grant's eyes shone, but he held himself still. I'm sorry, he said. Elena looked tired. For what? For not knowing. For letting my company treat you like a line item. For all of it. Elena studied him. Then she said something Alma would think about for months. Sorry is a doorbell. It tells me you came. It does not fix the house. Grant nodded. No, Mom. Then fix what you broke, she said. And do not start with flowers. Alma loved her immediately for that. That afternoon, the story should have become simple. Clerk finds error. Judge stops defaults. Developer apologizes. People learn lesson. But real life resists clean endings. At 3:15, Doreen received an email from court administration ordering a temporary suspension of Alma's counterduties pending review of irregular intervention in batch eviction processing. Doreen read it twice, then came to Alma's station. Back office, she said. Alma knew before she saw the email. Her stomach dropped anyway. In the back room, where old case boxes lined the walls and the copier smelled hot, Doreen handed her the printout. Alma read it. No public counterwork until further notice. No external communication regarding Westbridge files. Cooperate with administrative review. Paid status pending determination. Paid was supposed to comfort her. It did not. Alma thought of her father's appointment, now 3 weeks away. Lucia's hours had been cut. Raphael's medications cost more every refill. Paid leave would not last if discipline followed. Health insurance was tied to the job. Everything was tied to the job. Doreen's voice was low. The judge knows. The union knows. I'm not saying this is the end. Alma folded the email carefully. That's what people say when they can't promise. Doreen looked pained. You did the right thing. Alma wanted that to feel better. It did not. Doing the right thing does not always arrive with music. Sometimes it arrives with a printed email and a choice between rent and conscience. At home that evening, Raphael sat at the kitchen table, sorting old keys from a coffee can. He had good hours and bad hours. This was somewhere in between. Alma sat across from her and told him she might be in trouble at work. Not all of it. Enough. He listened, turning the brass apartment key in his hand, the same key she usually wore on her lanyard. She had taken it off before cooking and left it on the table. Finally he said, Did you stamp wrong? No. Did you lie? No. Did you read? Yes. He pushed the key toward her. Then trouble can sit down and wait. Alma laughed through her nose, and then she cried. Raphael looked alarmed, so she wiped her face quickly. I'm okay. He nodded, but his hand reached for hers. No, Mija, you are tired. That was worse somehow. Because he was right. She was tired of being careful, tired of being brave in ways that did not look like bravery, tired of knowing systems better than the people praised for building them. Tired of being told she was overstepping when she was the only one standing close enough to the edge to see who was falling. But the next morning, she still woke before dawn. She still made oatmeal for Raphael. She still checked the stove twice. She still put the brass key back on her lanyard, even though she was not allowed at the counter. And she still went to the courthouse. Not to be a hero, because the review meeting was at 9. Court administration sat around a table with laptops open, faces arranged in professional concern. The union representative sat beside Alma. Doreen sat behind her. Judge Bell was not in the room, but her written order was. The administrator, Mr. Voss, began. Mrs. Reyes, we appreciate your dedication. However, there are concerns about scope. Clerks must not independently investigate filings, Alma said. I reviewed documents submitted to the court. You compiled a spreadsheet, yes. That suggests analysis beyond ministerial duty. Alma felt the old anger rise, then settle into something steadier. Ministerial duty does not mean blind duty. The room tightened, Mr. Voss said. Careful. Alma looked at him. I am being careful, that is the point. The union rep shifted, but did not interrupt. Alma continued. The stamp is not decoration. When record staff enter a default judgment, the court record changes. If the file includes returned mail, missing unit numbers, and undocketed tenant responses, pretending not to see, that does not make us neutral, it makes us fast. Mr. Voss glanced at his laptop. The new batch system was designed to reduce processing time. I know, it did. There was silence. Alma looked at each of them. It reduced processing time by removing the slowest part of justice. What is that? Mr. Voss asked. Checking whether the person being judged was actually reached. Nobody spoke. Alma did not raise her voice. She did not need to. I am not asking clerks to become judges. I am asking this office not to punish clerks for noticing when the record contradicts the request. Returned mail is not a feeling. Missing apartment numbers are not empathy. A scanned answer sitting in the image queue is not activism. Those are facts in our custody. Doreen's eyes lowered, but Alma saw her mouth press together. That was Doreen trying not to smile. Mr. Voss leaned back. The meeting lasted 48 minutes. No one apologized. That would come later, in careful language. But Alma was returned to counter duty by the end of the day. A new temporary policy required supervisory review before any residential eviction default was entered when returned mail appeared in the file. A second policy required docket clerks to check the image queue for tenant filings before default entry. The batch filing vendor was ordered to preserve apartment and unit fields exactly as submitted, and any bulk residential case with missing unit numbers would be rejected for correction. It was not revolutionary. It was not glamorous. It did not trend online. It was a checklist, a boring, practical, life-saving checklist. That was the lesson Alma wished people understood. Most harm does not need a miracle to stop it. Sometimes it needs someone to check the address before pressing the stamp. The Westbridge cases slowed. That word, slowed, made investors angry and tenants breathe. Legal aid set up 2 tables in the courthouse hallway. The city housing office sent actual people instead of voicemail instructions. Halden Urban Residential withdrew 26 default requests and reserved notices with full apartment numbers, plain language relocation instructions, and direct phone lines. Grant did not announce it with a press conference. Judge Bell had made it clear that publicity around pending cases would not help him. He did something harder for a man like him. He sat in a conference room with his own attorneys and told them they were going to stop treating legal minimums as moral maximums. His lead attorney argued. The board argued. A project manager said delays would cost millions. Grant said, then we should have budgeted for doing it right. One board member asked whether this was about the woman from his childhood. Grant looked at the Westbridge list and said, it started there. It does not end there. That mattered. Because if Elena had been the only one protected, the story would have become sentiment. The repair had to reach people Grant did not know. Mrs. Brooks kept her apartment for 6 more months while her case moved properly. In that time, legal aid found errors in the charges. Some fees were removed. She eventually accepted a relocation apartment in a nearby senior building with an elevator that worked and a lease she understood before signing. She did not hug Grant for the camera. There was no camera. She sent Alma a note on lined paper. Dear Ms. Reyes, I am writing this down because you understand paper. I am not settled yet, but I am inside. My bed is mine, my kettle is mine. The window faces a brick wall, but in the morning there is a square of sun on the floor. I put my chair there. Thank you for making the court hear me before it moved me. Elena Brooks. Alma kept the note in the same drawer as the stamp pad, not to remember that she had saved someone, to remember what the work was for. Her father got his diagnosis in June, early Alzheimer's. The word finally entered the room and sat down. Alma cried in the car afterward, while Raphael looked out the window and hummed a song from a country he had left before she was born. Then he reached over and patted her hand. Do we have the papers? He asked. She laughed and cried harder. Poppy, we have the papers. They made a folder. Medication list, doctor contacts, power of attorney emergency card. Bus routes he should not take alone anymore. A photocopy of his ID. A note in his wallet that said, My name is Rafael Reyes, please call my daughter Alma. He hated that note at first. Then Alma told him gently, It is not because you are gone. It is so people can help you find your way back. He accepted that. Some lessons are easier to teach strangers than family. Months passed. The courthouse returned to its normal noise. Shoes squeaking on tile, printers jamming, attorneys sighing. People asking where to go, babies crying, security bins sliding, stamps landing. Alma still worked counter 4. The brass plaque in the lobby was changed, not removed, changed, the old sentence, justice moves faster. When access moves first was replaced for a quiet fight that Alma only heard about later. The new plaque read, Access requires accuracy. Under it, in smaller letters, was a line approved by the court, the city, and, reluctantly, the donor's foundation. No default without verified notice. Alma thought it sounded like something written by a committee. She liked it anyway. The best payoff came on a cold morning in November. A man came to counter 4 with a folder in one hand and a little girl holding the other. He wore a delivery jacket and looked embarrassed to be there. I need to file an answer, he said. My landlord says I didn't pay, but I did. I have receipts. Alma gave him the form. He pulled out rent receipts, money order stubs, text messages, and a photo of a payment drop box. The little girl watched Alma's stamp with serious eyes. What does that do? She asked. Alma smiled. It tells the court your dad showed up. The girl considered that. Does the court forget people? The man looked mortified. Nia. But Alma did not laugh. She looked at the child, then at the brass key on her lanyard, then at the stamp in her hand. Sometimes systems forget, Alma said. That's why people keep proof. She stamped the answer, received. The girl smiled like the sound had magic in it. Maybe it did, not fantasy magic, real magic. The kind made by ink, attention, and someone refusing to hurry past the truth. That afternoon, Grant Halden came into records without to camera. No assistant, no expensive urgency. He waited in line and took a number. When his number was called, he approached counter 4. Alma looked up. Mr. Halden, Miss Reyes. He slid a single document through the slot. It was a proposed policy from his company, not for the court to approve, but for public record attachment in all future residential relocation cases involving his properties. It required verified unit-level notice, phone outreach, in-person posted notice where legally allowed, plain language summaries, legal aid contact information, and a signed certification from a human reviewer. Not perfect, but real. Alma read it, all of it. Grant waited. For once he did not look impatient. When she finished, he said, I thought you might want to know. Alma slid it back. This belongs in your filings, not with me. It will be good. He nodded toward the stamp. Do you ever get tired of stopping people? Alma looked at him. I don't stop people, I stop paper from lying. Grant absorbed that. Then he said, Mrs. Brooks is doing well. She told me not to bring flowers. Alma smiled despite herself. Smart woman. She said if I wanted to bring something, I could bring a working phone number. Did you? Yes, better. There was a pause. Grant looked at the old brass key on her lanyard. Your father's? My parents' first apartment. He was right, you know. Buildings have people inside. Alma's throat tightened. Yes, she said. He is right about many things. Grant left without a speech. Alma appreciated that. The following spring, Raphael had a bad week. He put the cereal in the refrigerator, lost his shoes in the laundry basket, and asked Alma twice whether his mother was coming to dinner. His mother had been gone for 27 years. On Saturday, Alma took him for a slow walk downtown because the doctor said routine helped. They passed the courthouse. Raphael stopped at the steps. "You work here," he said. "Yes." He looked pleased. "You read the papers?" Alma smiled. "I do." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something wrapped in a napkin. It was a rubber stamp, toy-sized, the kind sold at office supply stores for children or teachers. It said checked. Alma laughed. "Where did you get this?" Raphael looked proud and confused. "For you." "Not official?" "No," she said, turning it over in her hand. "Not official, but important," he said. She closed her fingers around it. That evening she put the little checked stamp in the drawer beside Elena's note and the court stamp pad. It was not powerful. It could not enter a judgment. It could not stop a sheriff. It could not force a landlord to answer the phone. But it reminded her that before anything becomes official, someone should care enough to check. Years later, when Alma trained new clerks, she did not start with software. She started with the stamp. She placed it on the desk between them and let them feel its weight. Then she told them, "This is not just ink. This is the court's voice. People on the other side of this counter may be late, scared, angry, confused, or wrong. But before this stamp says they were silent, make sure the record proves they were heard." She did not tell them the whole Westbridge story unless they asked. She did not make herself the hero. She showed them where returned mail appears in the system. She showed them how apartment numbers vanish when imported badly. She showed them how to check the image queue for filings not yet docketed. She showed them the difference between giving legal advice and explaining a form. She showed them how to speak to people without making fear worse. Then at the end, she told them what Raphael had told her. "Read the paper before you move the stamp." Some rolled their eyes. New workers always think old warnings are too simple. But later, when the line got long and attorneys got impatient and the stamp sat heavy beside their hand, they remembered. One clerk caught a missing unit number on a domestic violence protection order service packet and fixed it before the hearing. Another found a tenant answer scanned under the wrong case number. Another noticed a Veterans Benefits Appeal deadline had been entered one day early because of a holiday. Small things, human things, the kind of things that never make headlines because the disaster does not happen. That is the quietest form of justice. Not the speech after harm, the check before it. Elena Brooks lived 3 more years in her new apartment. She kept a chair in the square of morning sun. She called Alma twice a year, once near Christmas and once on the anniversary of the day her motion was stamped, which she called her second moving day. She never became rich. Grant never became her savior. He became, at best, a man who had finally learned to let the people closest to the harm explain the repair. Raphael declined slowly. There were hard days. Days when Alma locked herself in the bathroom and cried into a towel so he would not see. Days when he accused Lucia of stealing his work shoes. Days when he forgot Alma's name but remembered the courthouse. Days when he held the brass key and said, "This opened something," and Alma would answer, "Yes, Poppy, it opened our first door." On one of his clear mornings, he asked her to bring him to the courthouse lobby. He stood under the plaque with both hands on his cane. "Access requires accuracy. No default without verified notice." He read the words twice. Then he nodded. "Good," he said. They wrote it down. That was his highest praise. A year after Raphael passed, Alma stopped wearing the brass key every day. Not because she forgot him, because she did not need metal at her throat to remember the door. She placed the key in a small frame with a copy of Elena's note, the toy-checked stamp, and one clean blank envelope, addressed correctly to apartment B214. She hung it on the wall near her kitchen table. Under it, on a piece of paper in her own handwriting, she wrote the lesson in plain words. Before you let a system punish someone for silence, make sure the system actually gave them a chance to speak. That was the whole story. Not that one clerk defeated greed. Not that one billionaire cried and fixed everything. Not that paperwork is holy. Paper can lie, systems can fail, rich people can be blind, poor people can be exhausted, clerks can be pressured, judges can be too busy. Good intentions can still produce harm when nobody checks the address. The lesson is smaller than a slogan and more useful. Read the notice. Keep the receipt. Check the apartment number. Ask where the paper went. Do not assume silence means consent. And if you are the person holding the stamp, the key, the clipboard, the scanner, the form, the route sheet, the medication list, the maintenance order, the delivery log, or the little piece of proof that decides what happens next, slow down long enough to see the human being attached to it. Because somewhere, there is an Elena on a hallway bench, holding an oxygen tank, trying to prove she came. Somewhere, there is a father with wet shoes, remembering the truth, even as memory leaves him. Somewhere, there is a child watching a stamp land and learning whether the world notices people like her family. And somewhere, there is a person with power waiting for the system to move fast. The question is not whether speed matters. It does. The question is what speed is allowed to run over. Alma Reyes never became famous. Most people who came to Counter 4 never learned her name. They only knew that when they slid their papers through the glass, the woman in the black cardigan would turn each page, check the address, check the date, check the signature, and press the stamp only when the record was ready to tell the truth. And sometimes, when the line was long and someone sighed behind her, Alma would pause with the stamp in her hand. Not for drama, not for power. For one quiet second, she would hear her father's voice at the kitchen table. Read the paper before you move the stamp. Then she would look at the person in front of her, not the case number, not the delay, not the problem, the person. And only then would she let the stamp fall.